The question that I challenge my clients to think about, Vinky, is as the business is scaling, are your communication skills scaling with the business? Meaning, let's say you're a business owner doing 100, 200, 300K top line revenue. Usually in that realm, you're doing everything: ascension, marketing, sales, delivery. You're wearing all of the hats. But as the business scales, half a mil, 750, million plus, doesn't matter. At those levels, you have to delegate what you used to do to other people, and you'll create SOPs or standard operating procedures. But if your communication skills are not sharp at that level, you'll create a lot of inefficiencies in the business, because when you ask an employee, hey, can you do this? They'll go, what did you mean? I didn't really understand what you were saying. And they'll miss the mark every time because the communication skills that you have are not strong enough for that level. So that's why it's important.
This is the Real Estate Vibe Show, and I'm your host, Vinky Lumba, a real estate investor. And today I have a very special guest. His name is Brandon Kumarasamy. He's with me, and he's going to be talking about communication. Welcome, Brandon. First of all, we've been planning this for a long time, and finally I got you booked on my show, which is awesome.
Vinky, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me on the show, and hopefully it was worth the wait.
Of course. A little bit about Brendan. Brendan is the founder of Master Talk. He coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become top 1% communicators in the industry. He also has a popular YouTube channel called Master Talk with the goal of providing free access to communication tools for everyone in the world. Wow. So today we're going to be talking about power of communication with Brendan. And as everybody can see, if you're watching on YouTube or listening, Brendan is very young. I think he's in his early 20s, and he has already started his company, Master Talk, and he has learned the power of communication very early on. And today he's going to be sharing all those secrets with us. So Brendan, before we start, I asked this question to everybody. So if you can briefly share your background or tell me, how did you become who you are today?
Absolutely, Vinky. Such a pleasure to be on the show. So for me, the story started when I was in college and business school. I wanted to become an accountant, funny enough. That was my goal in life, which is the absolute opposite of what I do today. And while I was studying to be an accountant, Vinky, I started doing these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing football or rugby or basketball, I wasn't one of those guys. I did presentations competitively, and that's how I learned how to speak. And then as I got older, I started coaching other students on how to speak for free back then, because I didn't really know coaching was a profession, just to help them win these competitions so they could get jobs in management consulting, in private equity, investment banking. And I accidentally got really good at communication coaching. So my last semester of college, Vinky, somebody asked me a question. And the question was, how did you learn how to speak? And I said, I don't know. And he was like, well, did you hire a coach? Did you do Toastmasters? And that's when I realized nobody was really making YouTube videos on how to communicate effectively. So I started making videos, and it turned into something I never could have imagined.
Wow, that's awesome. And you said when you were in college, then people didn't have the right tools or did not know much about this communication or soft skills, I would say. So how many years ago was that?
So this was 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay. So not that far. So I'm going to start with this first question. What is definition of communication to begin with, and why so important in today's life versus 7, 8 years ago?
Absolutely, Vinky. So what is my definition of communication, which is the same as public speaking, which is the following. How do we convey an idea in a way that achieves a specific outcome for a specific audience? So let me repeat that one again. How do we convey an idea in a way that achieves a specific outcome for a specific audience? So that could mean a bunch of different things. That could mean you're speaking on a stage, you're trying to raise technology venture capital dollars when you're at a demo day pitch. That could mean convincing your significant other that we should get Mexican food tonight and not Chinese food tonight. That could mean convincing somebody to buy your product. All of this encompasses communication, which is we're sharing an idea, and how do we use that idea to achieve our goal? That's my definition of communication.
I love that. Seriously. That's right. Getting your message across. And most of the time, people do not think how they communicate because they are communicating in their head and they're spitting out whatever is coming without realizing if the person on the other side of the table understands or got the message that they're trying to convey. Is that a true statement?
Absolutely. And then the follow-up to that, Venki, to your point, is Brandon, why is this important? Why should we even care about this? And for me, the answer is different for all of us. But the way I'll say it, since most of the people listening to this are entrepreneurs and CEOs, the question that I challenge my clients to think about, Venki, is as the business is scaling, are your communication skills scaling with the business? Meaning, let's say you're a business owner doing 100, 200, 300K top line revenue. Usually in that realm, you're doing everything. Ascension, marketing, sales, delivery. You're wearing all of the hats. But as the business scales, $500,000, 750, million plus, doesn't matter. At those levels, you have to delegate what you used to do to other people, and you'll create SOPs or standard operating procedures. But if your communication skills are not sharp at that level, you'll create a lot of inefficiencies in the business, because when you ask an employee, hey, can you do this? They'll go, what did you mean? I didn't really understand what you were saying. And they'll miss the mark every time because the communication skills that you have are not strong enough for that level. So that's why it's important.
I love that. So how do you improve your communication skills? I mean, as you're climbing the ladder, whether you're entrepreneur or even if you're in a corporate position, because you're going to be climbing the ladder to get up to the next level. So every time your communication has to go with you one notch up or two notches up, even if you're delegating, so that you're communicating perfectly with your employees because they're on the same page with you. Because I have seen this hurdle with multiple people, even with me too, because I can never find the person who can exactly do the things that I want that person to do. And this is a very common thing with a lot of people. So if you can shed some light on that.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of tangible techniques that we're going to jump into, Venki. But let me start with the mindset, which is communicate like the person you want to become, not the person that you are today. So let's say I'm coaching somebody in corporate and they're a manager and they go, I want to make director. I always ask them, what do you want to do in 10 years? They go, oh, I want to be a C-level executive. Well, I go, don't try and communicate like a director. Try and communicate like a C-level executive. Whether it's being a CTO, a CFO, CEO, it doesn't matter. Are you booking 15 minutes in your calendar every single week to just watch somebody at that level give an interview on YouTube? Watch somebody give a speech at that level so you see clearly what is the gap between you and that person. And for the business owner, the lesson is the same, but just a different lens of the coin, which is assume your business is going to be successful. Assume you're going to hit all your targets. So if you're going to hit on your targets and you're going to have the big business you want to build, you need to ask yourself today, not in 5 years, who is that business owner who's already doing $50 million top line? And how can I learn from that person and how they communicate right now while I'm still doing 570 in my business, so that as I scale, I already learned the skills that I need to win. So that's the mindset. Now let's go into the strategy. Communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time, Venki. Right? One of those balls is smiling, one of those balls is body language, one of them is storytelling, facial expressions. And it gets really confusing for people. So for me, the question has been, what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle? So I'll give you the first one, I'll throw it back to you, but I'm happy to share the others. So the first one is the random word exercise. Pick a word, like phone, like toilet paper, like light bulb, like home, random words, and create a random presentation out of thin air. And this serves 2 main purposes. One, it helps you deal with uncertainty because life is filled with it. And the second purpose is if you can make sense out of nonsense, you could make sense out of anything. So if you talk about silver cups, you can talk about anything.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but
No.
tell us the other 2 balls too. I'm interested to know what those as well.
No, don't be shy to jump in because I've been rambling for too long anyways. So that's the first one, right? The random word exercise. The second one is the question drill. And this will really help people raising capital, especially, or selling product. Okay. Which is we get asked questions all the time in our life, Venki. At school, at work, at home, on a podcast. but most of us are not prepared for the questions that life throws at us. When we get that important meeting with an investor, they ask you one question and you get really lost really fast. And the investor goes, I don't have time to deal with this person. They just move on to the next piece. And that's what CEOs don't understand is that the investing community is really small. So if you mess up these meetings, a lot of them, everyone will know that you messed up all of these meetings. So the preparation is really important, which brings me to the exercise. And I'll give you an example to demonstrate this, which is called the question drill. So a few years ago, when I started guesting on podcasts and doing coaching, and I wasn't that great at answering questions, I remember somebody asked me, Venki, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know, man. Los Angeles? New York City? You tell me. I have no idea where the fear of communication comes from. So how did I fix this? Every single day, Venki, for 5 minutes, I answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise, my products, or my services. So day one was, how do I overcome my fear of speaking? Day two is, what's my tips for introverts? Day three was, how do I balance my roles as an executive with my roles as a family from a communication perspective? So I just did one every day. But if you do that for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions and you'll be bulletproof.
Awesome. How about number 3?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let you go easily.
For sure, Venki. Happy to share. But one thing I want to drive is really the relevance. You know, you mentioned that I was really young, which is absolutely correct. Right? I'm currently 26 and I started coaching when I was 19. But notice how I'm able to very quickly give insights. So the idea is because I've just done the question drill 1,000 times when I'm speaking, because my average client is 20 years older than I am, right? So when they come up with the question, I always know the answer. But the people that I compete against in my industry who are in their 40s and 50s don't know the answers that I know because they're just not willing to do the reps. And that's really the goal, which brings me to number 3. It's so simple, Venki, that nobody does it. Make a list of 3 people you really love the most in your life. Nephew, niece, significant other, your favorite employee, a client who's doing amazing, and send them a 20-second video message to just show gratitude and appreciation for them. Hey, I just really love everything that you're doing in the world. Thanks so much for being in your life. I hope you're having a wonderful day. 3 times a day. The only rule is you're not allowed to retake the video. So what I challenge my entrepreneurial clients to do is they're forced, I take this to the extreme, they make a list of all of their employees and they have to send a video to all of them. And what happens is after a year of doing this 3 times a day, you'll have sent 1,000 videos. So you'll get way better on camera and you'll have impacted 1,000 people's lives too.
Wow, I love that. That's a very super cool technique. So let's talk about some of the common communication barriers. And what are those? And I think a lot of barriers out there. And how can somebody overcome those barriers?
For sure, Venki. So let me start with the most important one. The most important one is consistency. Here's the problem that the audience is making right now, Venki, that I always like to call out. They're writing these tips down. They're going, oh my God, Venki brought in such a great guest. He's like talking about the random word exercise, the question. Oh, I never heard of that. Ask a question every day. Oh, video message, so good. But they don't do it.
Exactly.
Right? They write it down, but they don't do the exercises. Which brings me to ball number 4, which is the best way to speak is to speak. You could listen to me and Venki talk all day. But if you're not practicing, then you're not going to get any better. So what does that mean? Are you booking 15 minutes in your calendar right now as you're listening to this podcast every single day to do all 3 of these exercises? I've never met a single person in my career that I wasn't yelling at to do this who wasn't already doing this consistently. So if you're the person that does this, you will win in your industry. That's why there's a quote that I always like to mention that people can write down, Venki, which is, if you communicate 20% better than your competition, you will stand out 100% of the time, right? So if you communicate just 20% better, you'll stand out. So that means if you're like in private equity listening to this and you're sending video messages to your clients and the people who love you, nobody does that in PE. Literally nobody. So it's not about, is the video perfect? Did I get this produced? It's more of a binary question. Did I do it, yes or no? And for 99% of the industry, the answer is no. And for 1%, the industry is yes. Yeah, I'll do it. And that's how you stand out. So that's probably the biggest barrier is consistency.
Yeah, I know the communication plays a big role, in success of your business or your career, whatever you're trying to do is very, very important. But the only problem is how to communicate. And a lot of people, they think actually that they can communicate, but not necessarily. It's not 100% the way it should be communicated. So I feel like some other hesitation could be some knowledge gap there, or they do not feel that they're complete within themselves. And the way they come out, some hesitation, some fear, because they already have this fear of rejection, in them. So guess what happens? Because they never get to turn even the warm leads into their investors. So if we can talk about that a little bit, how we can turn our leads into our investors, what actions we can take while we're communicating with the investors.
Absolutely, Vinky. So there's a couple of different layers we can cover there. So the first one, which is simple, which nobody does. I was advising a company the other day to do this, and they raised a lot of money really fast, is you send video messages to investors. Nobody gets video messages. So if you send one on social media, you'll immediately stand out from the other 50 to 75 pitches that they're getting in their inbox all the time. So that's one easy way to stand out. The other piece is, how do you articulate value in a very concise and effective way? Most business owners, they're really bad at explaining what they do in a very short amount of time. So if somebody just goes, "What do you do?" They go, "Oh, yeah, I'm building this technology, I'm building this business, and it's this, and it's great." And the guy's just looking at you, or the girl's just looking at you and going, "What are you talking about? Like, I have no idea what you're doing." So instead, what you want to do, and you want to get in the habit of doing, Vinky, and the people who want investing capital, is you want to be really good at conveying what you do and the benefit really fast. So let's say if somebody asks me what I do, and that's why my bio is so short, you would ask me that prior to the recording. It's like, okay, like I help ambitious executives and entrepreneurs become top 1% communicators in their industry. It's like, oh, I want to be a top 1% communicator in my industry. Done, right? So what about you who's listening to this? Airbnb is a great example of this as well. When the founding team started raising capital, you could explain Airbnb as a real estate marketplace between buyers and sellers exchanging assets so that you can create a better source of living for yourself when you travel, which is a very complicated way of explaining Airbnb. Or you could just say, I help you rent out the extra room in your house for money, right? It's like really easy.
Simple. Yeah.
Yeah. So the advice for business owners, very tactically, is you want to make a list of 15 different ways, not one, 15 different ways on how you would explain your business to somebody else, and ask your core customers, your top 10 customers, and your top 10 investors, have dinners with them and ask them this question. If you were to explain what I do back to me, how would you explain what I do? And then you get 15 different answers, and then you'll find a theme, and that becomes your key idea.
That's a very good thing that you said. It's like an elevator pitch, 30-second elevator pitch, right? So it has to be very clean and sharp elevator pitch. Like, just imagine that you're riding in an elevator with somebody, and then you have to pitch them and how you can convince them in 30 seconds. And this is like the first impression is the last impression anyways. That's what everybody says. And if you're rambling in your first meeting, and you're not even sure about yourself, what you're doing, or you're not confident enough about yourself, it's very hard to convey your message. And like, I like that the way you said it, make it simple, because sometimes if you're talking very high level, people don't get it because everybody's vibrating at a different wavelength. That's what I say all the time. And everybody's processing power is different. And the problem is everybody thinks at their level and they think whatever I'm thinking, other person is thinking the same way. And no matter what I say, he should get it or she should get it. And they say, if they don't get it, that's their problem. But what we don't understand is that the words that we are saying or writing or conveying, it does not have any meaning. The meaning is going to be what the other person's going to make the meaning out of it. So we have to come to that level. You have to gauge our audience, come to that level and convey the message. Do you agree with me?
1000%.
This is my technique.
No, it's excellent, Vinky. And the only I'll add on top is, why do founders make that mistake a lot? The reason is because they're in the weeds of their business 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. So because of that, they just know 100 times more about the business than the investor does. So what they do is when they explain their pitch, they go down to the weeds of their day-to-day ops of running the business instead of taking a more surface level and realizing that the investor has no clue and does not have the exposure that you do to the business. So you need to have the empathy to elevate the highest levels of detail the most important details of the business so that the investor understands what you do. Whereas a lot of founders, especially tech founders, when they're really deep in the weeds, when they go back and they explain it, nobody understands a clue of what they're doing or why they're doing it.
That's true. I think that's one point of failure right there too. If you look at it in a bigger picture, people think why we fail, and this could be the number one issue in the industry. Then people do not know how to communicate. Even they think they can, in their head.
Right. And the litmus test for that, because a lot of people think they're great communicators. The litmus test is, let's go back to the definition. Are we achieving the outcome of the communication? So if my goal is to raise a $10 million round, I'm raising 2 million, I'm not a great communicator because I did not achieve the outcome. Whereas there's somebody else in the world in the same industry who has achieved the $10 million raise. How is that person communicating? And that's the difference between communication and effective comms, is what actually drives the result home for the business.
So what needs to be changed beside the video, sending the video? Because I know people are more visual. And this is so funny. I just did the video for my 30-second video yesterday. And I didn't even know you're going to come to my iShow and tell me to do that. I did that yesterday because I wanted to be more creative when I'm sending out my deal. So that people are more visual, let me create a 30-second video and just 30-second kind of elevator pitches and them, okay, this is a deal. If interested, reach out kind of thing. That's what I just did. I didn't send it out yet. I'm going to be sending out today in the email to everybody. So this is so funny. You're telling me this thing. And then you say it's very effective. So beside that, what other tools somebody can use, because we are communicating with our investors, not just verbally, we just using email, social media, big time, So all those things that we are doing, it has to be kind of aligned, I would say. It's kind of same language we should be talking, whether it's a verbal or a social media or an email or a text message or a WhatsApp message, whatever we are doing. So if you can share some tips on that, that would be awesome.
For sure, Venki, absolutely. And I love that you're already implementing that. So there's a couple of ways to stand out. And of course, I always like mentioning, my advice will apply based on the context, because somebody who's raising technology capital is going to be very different than raising real estate capital, whether it's multifamily or residential or commercial. And the reason is because the end investor is going to be different. Like usually in commercial, you're working with people who have big funds, right? Usually, it's not always the case. And then with multifamily, you could do B2C. There's some people who are accredited investors who will just drop a $500,000 check or $250K. So it's different. Whereas with tech raising, a lot of the times you could just do a demo day pitch in an accelerator in front of 200 investors and book 20 meetings in an hour. So every context is different. But I would say that the number one KPI you want to measure is how many meetings are you booking? How many investor interest meetings are you booking? So the way you do this is you backtrack and you ask yourself, out of all of the sources that I've already raised capital from, even if it's just $1,000, even if it's 10 grand, where have I found the most success in and why? So for some people it might answer family and friends. Oh, I just got my family and friends to raise. The second person goes, oh, I'm in an investor community in such and such area and they already know my reputation, whatever. So you backtrack the data to see where you're getting most of the meetings, and then you find ways to triple down on those lead sources and from a communication perspective and how other people aren't doing it. So one example of getting more meetings in the door is the video messages, is targeted outbound on LinkedIn so you can get coffees with people, is going into your network and see who's already investing in these specific areas so I can reach out to them, build a relationship with them. The other piece that is heavily missed is after the meeting gets booked. A lot of people think that when the meeting gets booked, it's like, that's it. and that's often where people lose, Venki, is they make a big mistake, which is they don't do what I call bulletproofing a deck. So bulletproofing a deck means going back to the question drill, but for the people raising capital, we're multiplying that difficulty by 100. Because if you're just a regular presenter, like on a podcast is a great example. Let's say I mess up one of the questions. It doesn't matter. Like I'll just guest on another one and I'll do better on the other show. But in investing land, if you make a mistake, it can create bad consequences. So that means for 3 hours, you want to book a meeting, you want somebody to ravage the deck, ask you like 200 questions. So if you're selling commercial, it's like, okay, tell me about the property value, how many doors, right? If it's multifamily, what are the returns, what are the amenities? You just drill them a bunch of questions so that when you get into that meeting, you're perfect. So that's the big mistake. People don't drill enough.
Wow, I love that. So I think it's a good idea always to answer all the questions yourself. Think of all the possible questions that anybody can ask you. But still it happens. There's always one or two questions that you don't think of and that they come up, sometimes. And sometimes I've seen people stumble on those because they're not prepared to answer. It's not like that they do not have the answer. It's like they do not know how to convey the message in a positive way. So it's something like that situation arise. How do you handle that?
Yeah, fantastic follow-up, Vinky. So there's two ways of approaching this. This is a strategy I call a safe investor. So a safe investor is somebody who's already bought into you. They already know your reputation. They already bought into the fund. That could be somebody who's been a family friend for a long time. It could be somebody who had raised capital with you last time you had a great exit. It doesn't matter what this, or you've had a great return on the real estate properties that you bought into. So the safe investor, ask those people. Because if you make mistakes in front of those people, they don't care because they're already bought into it, but they give you a good lens on how to approach this. Let me give a personal example with me.
Mhm.
Obviously, I had a lot of insecurity going up to executives and getting them to buy into my service because I'm competing against people double my age. So how did I fix this? I went to the 2 to 3, not the 3 million, not the 7,000, the 2 to 3 executives that were my buddies. Like I knew one or two CFOs, I knew one CEO of this company, and they wanted to help me because they wanted to support the next generation. So they said, sure, I'll sit down with you. And they ripped me apart, Vinky. You're not considering this, Brendan. Like that's not what a CEO is prioritizing, this. And because they ripped me apart, but they don't tell the world that I made all those mistakes. Because those are called safe investors, people already in your corner. When I got the real meeting for the person who actually was interested in buying my service, I crushed that meeting. And I always got the deal because they would look at me and go, oh, wow, like he's answering all the questions I need help with. So having a safe investing group is good. Obviously, a coach helps too, right? Because they won't tell externally the mistakes you're making. But I think the key is really don't do it alone. Find a group of people that are just willing to play the role of someone really mean. So for me, the game is always, my philosophy is always make the practice infinitely more challenging than the real game. So when you play the real game, it's a joke.
That's true. I agree on that. Practice makes you perfect. That's correct statement. But other than that, you have to be confident in whatever you're doing. Even you have the confidence in your deal. There's no way anybody can deter you with any questions because you believe in your deal. You think you're going to take it to the next level. There's no way somebody can ask you a question that will just like take you away from your path. You will get confused or hesitant to answer that question. You always be there for them. So let's talk about the nonverbal communication now, how that can be used to convey your message, or how important is that in any communication. I know you touched about it a little bit earlier when we started the conversation, but I just wanted to mention it's very important, the nonverbal communication as well, because you might want to have, or you will have at some point, face-to-face meeting with your investors. I'm just thinking about in today's scenario, since we are doing everything on Zoom, or we are just, talking to people over the phone, given this pandemic for the last 2-3 years. So the face-to-face meetings are less, but, investors like to meet you in person for a coffee or a lunch or something. So in those kind of situations, whether even on the phone, nonverbal communication plays a big or vital role. So I would like you to touch on that as well.
Absolutely, Vinky. Happy to do that. So here's what I'll say. Most people don't make that many mistakes with their nonverbal. Sure, you can move your hands a little bit, don't put your hands in your pockets, things like that. But I'd say the most important thing to focus on with nonverbal is in the face. So the mistakes that most people make with their face is they don't smile enough when they're presenting. Like if you're trying to raise capital for a property, let's say you're selling multifamily, you're trying to raise around across like family offices and friends and family, you better be excited about the property you're pitching. Because if you're not excited, hey, yeah, I found this new deal in Florida and it's really cool and this is the IRR. Everyone's like, I'm not investing in this deal. You don't even look like you're even taking care of the deal. Why would I put money into this? So that's one piece. But the other piece that is a big mistake that most people don't mention or catch is you got to smile when you're listening to. So I'd say when you're asking questions to the person who's interested in giving you money, you can't listen with a poker face. Obviously, it's hard to see in a recording, but you could see my face when I nod my head and do this.
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it looks terrible. So you need to smile a little bit when you're listening to, not just when you're talking. That's the biggest thing you want to work on.
Yeah, and that's true. And even when you're talking to somebody over the phone, if you're smiling, people can hear your smile. Trust me, believe me or not, because your tone of voice changes when you smile, when you're happy, when you're excited about your deal. Because the way you communicate, the way you convey your message is totally different because you're 100% engaged in whatever you're trying to do. And the eye contact is very important too when you're doing face to face, even Zoom, even. So that's the number one thing I tell even my little nephew. He's only 10 years old and he's super cute. Oh my God. And whenever I say, come talk to me. And then he will just look here, there, whatever. And then what I'm trying to teach him is when somebody's talking to you, look in the eye, make the eye contact. And then he'll come home some days and he'll tell me, my teacher was talking to me and I looked her into her eyes and I understood what she was trying to say. And it's very important, the eye contact, because you're making the connection right there as well. Wow. Oh my God. It was super awesome that we touched on so many things. So let's talk one more thing, how this, whatever we learned today, all these communication techniques, how it can transform your relations, your business, and all your surroundings, your society, or your networking skills. Everything is going to get improved. So if you can share some light on that.
Absolutely, Venki. For me, communication is not just about raising capital. It's not just about getting on the stage, giving a talk, getting on a podcast. It's every moment of your life. It's the way that you talk to your family. It's the way that you raise your children. It's the way that you make new friends. It's every little moment of your life. And when we realize, Venki, that communication helps improve the quality of our life, we take it more seriously. That's why the question for everyone to reflect on is this. How would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? How would your life change if you're really good at communication? And if you could really imagine that in your mind, that's what creates the motivation to do all of the things. The random word exercise, the question show, the video messages. That's what creates the motivation to actually get that result. And that's why I call communication the accelerant of dreams. It doesn't matter what your dream is. Communication helps you accelerate that dream a lot faster.
Great. And listen more. That's the other thing. That's awesome. So share one golden nugget with my audience.
Absolutely. On listening, for sure. So here's the key with listening, Venki. Everyone says it's important, right? We got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, like Aristotle always says, and it's like you got to listen more than you speak. But nobody really shares tips on how to practically listen more effectively. Like, how do you actually do this? So I'll teach you one strategy. If people do this, 100% guaranteed they'll improve at listening. I call it the goals call. So goals call is very simple. Pick one person in your life, somebody that you love, somebody has a growth mindset, somebody's listening to this podcast with you. That's a perfect person to do this with. And what you do is you book a 45-minute call with them. In the first 5 minutes of the call, you just ask them one question. What are your top 3 goals for the year? And why are those goals important to you? So then that person spends 5 minutes, Venki, and writes down their goals. I want to lose weight. I want to make more money. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I want to start a family. It doesn't matter. They write their goals and why it's important. And for the remaining 40 minutes of that call, Venki, you're only allowed to do 3 things. Number 1 is you are not allowed to coach or give any advice to that person for the whole call. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you are only allowed to restate what that person says. Example, let's say I did this with you and you said, Brendan, my top 3 goals are such and such and such. I restate. So I say, Venki, what I heard was these are your top 3 goals and this is why it's important to you. Did I get that correctly? And then you go, yes, but I forgot to mention this. So I start writing it down. And the third thing is for the remainder of the call, I'm only allowed to ask you questions around your goals. So let's say you said, I want to make more money this year. I'll go, how much are you making now? How much do you want to make next year? Where's most of your revenue coming from? Where would you want that revenue to be? And I keep drilling you on questions. And what happens if you do this with 10 different people and you never give advice, your deep listening skills will skyrocket.
Yeah, I like that. Again, it's a practice, right? Practice makes you perfect. So everybody remember that. That's awesome tip right there. So this brings us to our rapid fire round. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You're going to answer in one word or one sentence only. If you didn't listen to my podcast before, it's going to be a surprise, which is going to be more fun. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. The first question is, what is one of the most important things that you have learned in your life that it works for you all the time now after learning it?
That time is much more important than money. I always used to think money is more important, but time is the asset we can't buy back.
That's so true because it's limited. Share one good book that you have read and recommend to my audience.
Thirst by Scott Harrison. Scott's the CEO of Charity Water. It's a nonprofit he started for clean water. He's one of the best storytellers on the planet.
Awesome. Say that again one more time, the book name.
Thirst by Scott Harrison.
Thirst by Scott Harrison. Awesome. In one word, what does life mean to you?
What does life mean to me in one word? The only word that comes to mind is insanity. I think the people who follow their insanity often find a great joy out of living their life versus people who just follow the norm.
Wow, that's thinking out of the box. That's awesome. What is your biggest passion?
Probably communication, leaving a cool legacy.
Right. If you can turn back in time and talk to your younger self, which will be like, like 2 years old, maybe. What would you tell yourself?
I would say be insane or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But if you want to do something important with your life, something magical, you need to realize that the people who do crazy things with their life are often crazy people. So just be crazy.
That's true. You need to jump. You need to jump out of the crowd and then stand on the edge and see where the crowd is going. Don't go with the crowd. That's what my goal is. All right. So how can people reach out to you, Brendan?
Absolutely. This is such a great treat, by the way. Thanks for having me. So 2 ways to keep in touch. Number one is the YouTube channel. Just go ahead and type Master Talk in one word. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to communicate ideas effectively. And number two is to attend one of my free communication workshops. I do a free one over Zoom every 2 weeks where you get to see a lot of me applying those tips live on a call. And 8-year-olds come to that call, CEOs of massive companies come to that call. Everyone can join, and it's rockstarcommunicator.com.
Thanks, Brendan. It was super awesome to have you on my show today.
Super fun to be on, Vicky.